All right, hello everyone. This is Josh Lieberman, and I'm with KMS Technology, and I'm a diversity and inclusion champion. And I would guess if you're on this webinar, a great deal of you are as well. So thank you for joining. I'm a local business owner in Atlanta and a big supporter and a big believer in Scholas, and I'm proud to partner with them in what they do and all the incredible work that they do. If you aren't familiar with Scholas, it's a national organization. I've been in business and supporting the community for over 25 years. What Scholas does, what we do, is we work with local leading employers in the tech community, and we help them find diverse talent pools and match diverse talent pools that we train and connect them with great local leading employers and enable them to find great jobs and add great value to those organizations. Believe it or not, in Atlanta alone, we've graduated well over 400 people who are proudly working in the Atlanta tech community, today. Diverse by Design is powered by Scholas. It promotes solutions-driven conversations about DE&I within tech. And not only that, what Diverse by Design does is it provides tools and content to help executives build diverse and socially impactful organizations. For today's conversation, what we're going to do is talk about how relationships can be used as a tool to help with diversity, equity, and inclusion. To lead this discussion today, I want to introduce Tracy Palmer, who is the Managing Director for Scholas Atlanta. I personally grew up in Pittsburgh. Tracy grew up right down the road from me in West Virginia, and she spent about 20 years of her life, her career, working with diverse student populations in roles from being an instructor to directing large programs like Scholas. Like me, she's passionate about building a diverse and equitable workforce. Since I've started with Tracy in working with her at Scholas, one thing I've realized about her is she's a relationship person. She understands the value of building relationships and maintaining those and growing those. And leading Scholas in Atlanta, she does that with students. She does that at the corporate level. And she does that in building relationships at the community level. So with that being said, what I'd like to do next is turn it over to Tracy and allow her to lead this discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh, for that warm intro. Before I start this conversation about the importance of relationships, I would like to pause and say that relationships are at the heart of healing this nation. For where there are no relationships, there can be a lack of understanding. And when there is no understanding, fear can be birthed. So I would invite you to walk with us today through this relationship journey with Joey Womack, whose now relationships are informed by his then relationships. These relationships inform and are the catalyst of the work he does today. The work of building relationships as a foundation for building understanding, inclusion, and equity. According to a CNBC article, approximately 70% of all jobs are not published on publicly available job sites. And the research has long shown that anywhere from half to upwards of 80% of jobs are filled through networking. Access to the right networks can make or break careers and launch or sink startups. But what happens when specific communities are excluded from the right networks? How can we use relationship building as a tool to diversify tech? To answer that question and more, I'm happy to introduce Joey Womack. Joey Womack's goal is to positively impact 1 billion, not 1 million, 1 billion people, 1 billion people by the year 2039. Part super connector, part startup coach. He is the founder and CEO of Goodie Nation, a national support nonprofit that is closing the relationship gap for tech-focused social entrepreneurs and diverse founders. He is also the founder and CEO of Amplify for Good, a mission-driven agency that uses rapid problem solving to help large companies, nonprofits, and governmental agencies create social impact. Since starting this journey in 2014, Joey is on pace to reach his goal by working with the likes of Care USA, Google, Hartsfield-Jackson, and Atlanta International Airport, Ford Motor Company, Coca-Cola, Google for Startups, United Negro College Fund, Coca-Cola Scholars Foundation. I can go on and on, Village Capital, and the White House Historically Black College and University Initiative. Joey is also the founder of the Atlanta Black Tech Initiative, where he serves as the lead for startups and K-12 divisions. Joey currently sits on the board of Startup Atlanta, Venture Atlanta, and Georgia Social Impact Collaborative, as well as on advisory boards for South by Southwest and SoCap Spectrum Conference. He's a rebel with a cause at the leading edge of change. Joey was bitten by the entrepreneurial spirit in 2002 when he launched digitalguestlist.com as a graduate student at Florida A&M. Go Rattlers. He grew the site to 80,000 users and advertised thousands of events for Fortune 500 companies, agencies, high-profile promoters, doing such events as the NBA All-Star Weekend, Super Bowl Weekend, Essence Music Festival. Need I say more? Joey received his MBA from Florida A&M in the spring of 2003, where he was also initiated in Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. He has been named one of the top 40 under 40 alumni and received the Outstanding Alumni during FAMU's 125th anniversary celebration. Thank you so much for being here, Joey.
I'm super excited to be here, and thanks for allowing me the opportunity.
Awesome. We are going to get right into it with this super connector, Joey. And so, Joey, you are a self-titled super connector and have the ambitious goal of impacting, again, 1 billion people by 2039. Now, where did that goal come from, and how has your journey gone so far?
Yeah, a good question. So I'll try to be somewhat brief. I'm a huge fan of origin stories and stuff like that. So before I get into actually how I actually got the number 1 billion in the year 2039, I'm gonna go back and share a little bit of origin story, because I think it speaks to the confidence that I have in actually having the ability to make it happen. So I'm originally from Alabama. I'm from Mobile, to where my father's originally from. My mother's from Montgomery. And so in Mobile, my father is from the neighborhood of Africatown. This is where the slaves from the Clotilda, the last slave ship to come to the US, settled and built a community. Long story short, that community did a lot of great things, including it created a baseball culture in Mobile that supported Hall of Famers like Satchel Paige, Hank Aaron, Billy Williams from the Cubs, and Willie McCovey. And so if you go a little bit northeast in Alabama to Montgomery, where my mother's from, she lived in the neighborhood where called Centennial Hill, where Martin Luther King Jr. lived when he was in Montgomery. And so like right around the corner. This is not like a large city right around the corner. This is like a few hundred feet right around the corner. Close family friends. And you had a lot of also great people in that neighborhood as well. You had Ralph David Abernathy was from that neighborhood. Nat King Cole grew up in that neighborhood, and a few other people. I mean, it's just, when you talk about civil rights movement, kind of the nexus in the 50s, I mean, it really was sparked in that neighborhood. I bring those stories up because it created greatness that was really normal to me. And so going into those neighborhoods, I really felt like it was part of my, you could feel the spirit in the neighborhood of social impact. And so I felt like I was part of it, even though I wasn't from those neighborhoods actually, or originally. And so when it came time for me to get my calling, you just kind of drew upon that and gave me the confidence that I can make this happen. Because a lot of those people were neighbors, they were friends, they were normal to my family and people I looked up to. So when it comes to actually getting to the point around that actual goal, in 2014, in January 2014, MLK weekend, I got into a program called the Hive Global Leaders Program. The first ever cohort, like 30-something social entrepreneurs, people that wanted to make change throughout the world. And so at this point, I'm transitioning from being a startup founder to supporting other social entrepreneurs and impact leaders. And so in this cohort, you had a gold medalist from the same swim team as Michael Phelps. You had someone who wanted to become the first woman prime minister of Nepal, and her father was a former high-ranking official in the government there, thinking like secretary level. You had other people that were super well connected on the global level. You had someone who was actually from India and wanted to become the prime minister one day. And these are all people in their late 20s, early 30s. And so the first day of the program, it's a weekend program, the organizer asked us the question, how can we impact change for 1 billion people? This was Saturday morning, Friday night, Saturday, something like that. And so, and I'll stop here. And so I'm looking around the room. At this time, I'm living down by the old Brave Stadium in Atlanta, and I'm thinking more so about how can I create change for Atlanta, maybe the Southeast. And so I look around the room. These are people with global aspirations. And so as a competitor myself, I'm like, okay, I need to up my game. I need to get better. And so let me come up with a plan over the weekend to impact change for 1 billion people. And so that was 2014, and I had to put a number on it to keep some pressure there. So I picked 25 years. So 1 billion people over the next 25 years, which is 2039. And the funny part about it as I close is, come to find out later, what the organizer actually meant was, how could we collectively, like 30 people in the room, help 1 billion people. But by that time, I already had my plan, and I was ready to go. So I was like, if I got to take this 1 billion by myself, it is what it is. And the rest is history.
I think of the quote by Carolyn Wanga, the CEO of Essence, where she says, your story is as important as the business strategy. This is story and strategy together. So I think about 1 billion by 2035. So what is your process for connecting with others and connecting your contacts with each other? How do you measure that success?
Yeah. I think so one of the superpowers, especially at Goodie Nation, that we say is that we want to make the right connection at the right time for entrepreneurs and people making the world a better place. And the correct piece, the correct point there is time. So our process is really broken down into, and I can go tactical if you want to, but basically asking entrepreneurs and social impact leaders, what are their top needs? So our promise to founders is helping to develop them as humans and as CEOs while holding them accountable to making progress. So in the process of making them or holding them accountable to making progress, we're asking them on a weekly basis in many cases, what do you need help with? Do you need help with coaching? Do you need to make a hire? Do you need access to customers or to capital? And so once they kind of raise their hand and say, I need help in this area, we then kind of go to work to try our best to fulfill that need. Kind of going a little bit deeper, because we have an awesome founder network, we'll go to the founders and say, hey, can you help them in any kind of way, right? So we use Slack and other tools and stand-ups and things of that nature. We also have an expert community that can maybe address this as well, either again through coaching or customers or something like that. And then we also go to the network of our experts to see if they can fill the gap. And so one of the things that we do, so a few of the things that we do to kind of measure success is, one, what we call time to value. So the time it takes between someone says, hey, I need help, and then B, us actually making an introduction to fill said need, we measure that. And we try to keep it really down to 72 hours if at all possible. It's not perfect, but we try to keep it down as low as possible. And then after we make a connection, we use a tool called Bridge, where we automatically will send a quick follow-up survey to both individuals, asking them if the connection or introduction was either great, okay, or not good at all, and provide a little bit of context. And so through that whole process, everyone gets a score both ways. And what we're looking for is to make 4 great introductions per month per person in our network.
Oh, awesome. I think about we met in similar manner. So Joey and I met, and he connected me with some individuals for a software engineering roundtable, and thus the rest is history. And so that leads me to like my next question. I learned in my research about the Hemophilia Principle, which really means that like birds of a feather kind of like flock together. And so that principle is a widely addressed phenomenon in social science when people are likely to form social connections with others that look like them based on characteristics like age, race, gender, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk about how this principle impacts people of color, especially tech entrepreneurs?
Yeah, and also I want to even loop back a little bit to the previous, conversation or the previous question as well. So part of that, you mentioned when you and I first met, we talk about this thing around relationships, but also there's a huge part of this, like the undertone is trust. And so one of the best pieces of advice I got from a guy named Kwame Yanku out of the Bay Area is about extend. So if you want trust to be just like anything else, if you want something given to you, you got to give it first. And so his recommendation to me, his advice to me was, hey, what he does is when he meets somebody, when he meets a founder and they say they need help in these areas, he actually gives them the 3 best connections he has in his network, no questions asked. Nothing in return, no questions asked. And that's the huge extension of trust. Yeah. If you are just meeting someone for the first time and you're going to give them your 3 most valuable connections, like you've extended a ton of trust that way, right? And so then you do that, they're like, oh, this is awesome. And so they kind of, it develops a relationship and then trust is given back. Now, in terms of, the principle that you mentioned earlier, I think a lot of times, and hopefully this answers the question, but a lot of times you think back to society, particularly for people of color in this country and unfortunately many other countries. So we all know that access and opportunity traditionally have not been distributed in a fair way, in this country. And so those are the things that impact things like connection points, where people grow up, the schools they go to, and things of that nature. There's a report from Cape Port Center called the Leaky Tech Pipeline Report, which goes into detail that says, like, in particular, those that graduate from top colleges and those who are employees of top companies, particularly tech companies, are the key to this whole thing. And then you can go another step deeper and say those that are closely connected to those individuals. And so when we start talking about these type of networks, when access and opportunity are not distributed in a decently equal way, like remotely equal, it leads to huge divisions in terms of people getting access to schools, not just colleges and universities. I'm talking about elementary schools and sometimes preschools, middle schools, and high schools, the times when real relationships are created and also where people live. We talk about all the stuff around, I'm not going to go into that, but where people actually live, like those are the things that determine relationships that prove valuable by the time people become adults.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm thinking about, refer back to what the CNBC article that I referenced in the beginning of your introduction about 70% of all jobs are not published on publicly available websites, that they come as a result of networking. And you mentioned in other conversations the concept of the relationship gap. Can you tell us a little bit more about that relationship gap and how the statistics that I mentioned can inversely impact certain communities? A little more about where you live, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, even if you want to, and I think you did a great job earlier in terms of with the stats as it relates to jobs. If you think about in terms of entrepreneurship, something like 2.6% of all venture capital funding goes to only 2.6% goes to Black and Latinx founders. It's not that much higher for women entrepreneurs. And when it comes to networks and things of that nature, like something like 80% of all venture capitalists come from like Stanford, Harvard, Yale, or something like that. So they all come from, the vast majority of them come from like 3 or 4 schools. And if people of color can't get into those schools, it just really creates a huge disadvantage. And so the relationship gap for us is the lack of connection between entrepreneurs and those who graduated from those type schools, and again, work for like the Facebooks, the Googles, the Microsofts, Amazons of the world. And again, I think this also can be extended to people that go for corporate employment. So there's a lack of connection between employees and those that work for these top companies. We can talk a lot about some of the not gonna say the data per se, but it's really interesting in terms of how these relationships are actually, granted, and what really drives them.
Awesome. So I'm thinking, so how can like companies become more intentional about building these relationships with more diverse networks as pathways for diverse candidate pipelines? I think, per Scholas, we are a diverse pipeline of talent. So how can companies in general build those networks of diverse pipelines?
Yeah, so I think there's a few ways. So just at a high level, I think it's about creating a culture where people are intentional. And to be clear, it takes intentional efforts to solve this relationship gap. So I think about creating a culture. And so process for creating a culture is action, habit, behavior, culture. So from an action standpoint, my recommendations are for companies, and let me take a step back. I envision a world where all companies have an official policy to do volunteer for group. I'm just gonna say this: groups that are traditionally underrepresented in tech, so on and so forth. They don't have as many advantages, and so that may not happen ever. It may take 30 years or something, but I think there are some things that people can do individually, right? Or at a kind of a division level. One, start by giving 2 hours a month to doing a few things. And I'll take a step back in terms of talking about some of the effects of a lack of connections. One, lack of connections does lead to things like lack of access to employment. For entrepreneurs, it leads to lack of access to capital, but it also leads to a few other things like lack of access to coaching, to individuals that can give personal growth or career development advice. And then also from the startup side of things, access to talented people that they can hire, so on and so forth. And so through that lens, if large companies can get some of their employees to dedicate just 2 hours per month to doing any of those three things for people, particularly people of color in tech, eventually, and you do that over 6 months, eventually it turns into a habit. Yeah. And then when you get maybe 10 to 15, 20, 30 people in your company that have a habit over 6 months, it turns into group behavior. And then eventually that group behavior turns into a culture. And maybe it's just, let's say, the engineering division. There's a culture in the engineering division of said company around supporting talented people of color. And that's how we close this relationship gap. And you're talking about a year, 18 months or so, you can start seeing culture being developed.
And hopefully it won't take 30 years to do the action and habit and behavior and develop that culture. But tell me, what are some organizations that we can connect to be more intentional about those connections? Are there any organizations that emerge to the top of your mind that could be, part of the intentional engagement of getting us there before 30 years?
Y'all, maybe.
Absolutely, absolutely.
No, I mean, I'm not, I'm not saying this because I'm here. I mean, I would say it in general. I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, outside of this, I'm doing some work to kind of map the ecosystem of tech training. I mentioned earlier K4 Center. They actually published this a few weeks ago. The what they call it's a follow-up to the Leaky Tech Pipeline report, and they looked at several different organizations across the country that are doing great work in all parts of the tech ecosystem, both in tech training and so on and so forth. I mean, you have like Bixel Exchange out in LA. You have a few people doing great work out in Oakland, the Oakland Codes Group. So those are some of the ones that are doing a great job of connecting organizations. Talented people in tech with larger organizations. You think about groups like Black Product Managers Network. You think of Dev Color and a few others that serve on the periphery, not necessarily the hardcore training per se, but they do a lot of the career development, and they have people that work in large companies. So it's a very interesting ecosystem to be a part of. lots of room for growth, but it also means lots of room to create the impact and shape it the way we want.
Awesome, and thank you, because we are very intentional about making sure that we represent the underrepresented. When I say we, per Scholas, the underrepresented and underserved population, to give them access to tech, so that that income inequality that we see that exists nationwide, but we're in the number 1 or number 2 percentage in Atlanta. It is really an intentional effort on behalf of Per Scholas. So thank you for acknowledging that. So let me ask this question. I've heard the quote, like, to inspire people, don't show them your superpower, show them theirs. How can what advice could you give to people listening today who may not be in charge of their company policies, but want to be more intentional about relationship building for good?
That's a good question. Woo, I love that quote. You need to send that to me afterwards. So, so here's the thing. I believe everybody has a role to play in solving this problem. But first and foremost, I believe this is a solvable problem. Like, we can do this. You can do this, right? So there's a few things I think everyone can do to determine their superpower and figure out how they can plug into the ecosystem. One is to think about the people who have created inflection points in your own life. And the reality is, again, so inflection points are significant moments that cause hopefully a good ascension in your life, right? And so think about those people. So spend some time over the weekend, in the shower, lying in bed at night, or in the morning, just in deep thought, think about the people who created these inflection points in your life. The reality is that you are the current versions of those people right now. You can do the same for someone else.
Oh, wow.
Now, in terms of how you actually do that, there are a few things that I say to people sometimes to determine what their superpower is. One is, think about what currently upsets you most in this world, right? There's no judgment, whatever upsets you. And it doesn't have to be what's popular or what's on the news right now. For example, one thing that upsets me most in this world is people wasting time. The reason why time is a big thing for me is it's the one thing we don't get back, but it also relates to potential and things of that nature. So I'm really big on productivity to help people realize their potential, or help things, people, initiatives, whatever, reach their potential. So once you understand, it took me a few years to really understand this, but once you kind of really understand what really upsets you in the world, then go back to how you were in elementary school, right? When maybe maybe some people had a room by themselves, maybe they didn't, but maybe you spent some time before, but more importantly, it's before the pressures of the world hopefully got to you. Did you close your room and you dance like obviously no one was watching or anything like that? Did you draw? Did you do whatever happened when you were probably 3rd, 4th, maybe even 2nd grade? Before many times people get to middle school and in 6th grade and you start to become a teenager and all that type of stuff happens, you get influenced by the rest of the world. That's who you really are. That's who you really are when you were 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, right? You can just be who you are. If you can combine those two circles, who you were as a little kid, and then what makes you upset in the world, that gives you a really good sense of direction in terms of purpose and stuff like that. That's superpower. The third one, if you can do this, if you can, not everyone can, if you can look back and to see the types of jobs or skills that maybe your parents, aunts and uncles, sisters, brothers, grandparents have, that'll also give you a sense as well. And so if you have that ability, if you can create that Venn diagram of all those 3 things, that'll give you a pretty good sense of your superpower, and then how you can obviously then utilize it to help someone else.
Awesome. I'm sitting here thinking, like, what is my superpower? And I think it lies in the relationship space. And speaking of relationships, I want to make sure that we get to some of the questions that are in the chat. James, I saw your message come through, and can you please repeat the quote? So the quote was, to inspire people, don't show them your superpowers, show them theirs. And so one of the questions that came from the chat, and so I'm going to take that question. And give me 1 second. One of the questions that came from the chat is, how can they be more intentional? And I think you already answered that question on how to be more intentional as it relates to that. Or so here's another one. What are some strategies for increasing the number of people of color and underrepresented populations in tech? So one of the questions from our registration prior to the chat.
Sure. And I do want to address that intentional piece, because I think in many cases, people talk about being intentional, so on and so forth. Like, being intentional is hard. Essentially, almost by definition, like it's difficult. It means going the extra step or going the extra mile. And so when you don't want to do something, that's a good indication that, I need to go ahead and do it, but I don't want to do it. Like, that's being intentional. And it shows itself in many ways. Sometimes you're in a meeting at work and you want to say something, but you don't think that, you don't think that it will go over well. Now, to be clear, you got to have some discernment. But if it's about being right versus being wrong, you take the next step and be intentional about doing it. If it's like, I need to put my neck on the line, I need to advocate for someone, that's being intentional. So that's, to me, that's where if you trust something or not. Do you fight or do you advocate for it? That's being intentional. And so in terms of strategies, I'm really big on looking for opportunities, right? Tons and tons. And this is also what I love about, you all's program, as I learn more and more about it. I think there's so oftentimes we talk about how are ways we can get more people of color, in particular in tech, and underrepresented groups. I grew up, there's a few things. One, I grew up playing baseball. I thought at one point I actually had the opportunity. I'm not saying I would have gone pro. I ain't that guy. You know what I'm saying? But I could have played post high school. And so growing up playing baseball, you talk about scouting baseball versus scouting like NBA and stuff like that, where there's only a few players that are really, really good every year, versus baseball, there are thousands. And so it takes scouts to do a lot of the hard work to find thousands and hundreds of people who can play baseball every year. I think when it comes to corporate recruiting, they act more like NBA, where they go to 1 or 2, 3 or 4 or 5 events a year and recruit all the great talent, versus being baseball scouts and going and do the not cool work, the grunt work, so on. And that's not to necessarily talk bad about recruiters or anything like that, but it takes a lot of hard work, because there are tons of talented people out in the world who don't get even a shot, who don't get an interview or anything like that. The second thing is I often hear people talk about to do things in cool ways, that culturally relevant ways. And that works as well. Like, you can always do things in a culturally relevant way. I come from a nightlife background, so I get, kind of doing things in cool ways to get the attention of people. But I do think there are other opportunities to expand the definition of when we think about tech, right? It's just not software engineering and development. You think product management, you think design, you think digital marketing and storytelling as a way to on-ramp people to even if you want to get to software development down the road. And so I think, you even think about from a industry or a vertical level or area. You can use things like esports or content creation to draw people into the tech environment. And then once they're in, you can do what you got to do to educate them and get them in the pipeline. So it's just not simple. Some things that are doing things that are done right now. Let's get really creative in how we bring people into the pipeline. And once we get them into the pipeline, there's a whole other set of issues to worry about. But we'll talk about that at another time.
Well, what's interesting is one of the next questions that I was going to pivot to that came from our chat is, so James asks, what are some barriers? What are some barriers that you think are getting in the way of bringing more diversity to the tech field?
Yeah, this is tough, right? It's tough. I think there's so many ways to answer this question. I'll say this. Yeah, I could probably answer this in one of 20 different ways. The one thing, when I get asked questions like this, when I figure out there's one of 10 to 12 different ways to answer the question, whatever popped into my mind first or in my heart is what I speak about. So what's been on my mind recently is I believe that especially a local tech ecosystem or even on a national level is only as strong as the organizations that are training the people in that ecosystem. So if we're talking about tech training, how much support is your organization getting, Tracy, in the network of your organization nationally? Like, that's a good barometer of how the overall ecosystem is facing. So if you are facing barriers, the ecosystem is facing barriers. Now let's take a step down and focus on how much true investment at the K-12 level is being put into educating students of color in particular and other diverse groups in all areas of tech. And so when we start to look at that and what really that ecosystem looks like, it's not efficient. And that's a huge, huge barrier. So unfortunately, the reality, my opinion, is the reality that many companies are facing in terms of recruiting diverse talent. And even when it comes to the post-secondary level, again, these problems started out when these young people were in middle school and even earlier. So those are the barriers that have to get addressed first. So as adults who are responsible for training these individuals, hiring these individuals, and ultimately becoming the individuals to get jobs, we're not all struggling and having these conversations right now and being stressed out.
Awesome. Thank you. I know we could spend probably most of our time together talking about barriers and systematic change, but I want to take the time and an essence of time to just, I've heard so many great nuggets that I want to take away, and, hearing from, access to talking about, action, to habit, to behavior, to culture, to barriers, and finding your superpower by what upsets you and what were some of your jobs that you've done. But I think the most important piece that I'll take away from this is trust. And so trust is at the heart of every relationship. And so we finished where we started, and that's with trust. Trust is the foundation for bridging any gap. And so thank you, my friend Joey. Today, Joey Womack of Goodie Nation. Remember 1 billion people by 2039. So help Joey get to this goal through his massive connector, his super connector, superpower. And so I'm going to turn it over to Nia. Again, thank you, Joey, again, who will explain ways to partner with Scholas, Atlanta, and Diverse by Design. So Nia.
Hello, thank you so much for that, Tracy. You were an amazing moderator for this impactful conversation. And Joey, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. I'm sure everyone who listened today is walking away more than equipped to begin to leverage relationship building as a tool for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Joey. As we say here at the end of every Diverse by Design event, investing in diversity and inclusion isn't just a philanthropic principle. It simply makes good business sense. Significant research shows that a diverse and inclusive workplace tends to provide better staff engagement, higher productivity, and less turnover, as well as an increase in innovation and profitability. At Diverse by Design, we want to empower organizations to move from conversations to action. And we want to meet with you to help your organization figure out how to do just that. We invite you to schedule a consultation with us to learn about how your organization can become diverse by design. Visit our website to set that up and learn more at www.diversebydesign.org. Before we go, I want to thank Diverse by Design's corporate sponsors, as well as our partner, ITSMF. Our sponsors are Google, Tech Systems, JP Morgan Chase, Comcast, and Chubb for their support. And most of all, thank you for joining us for this special Diverse by Design Atlanta event. Let's keep this conversation going. Use hashtag Diverse by Design to continue the conversation online. There are always opportunities to get involved with us. Keep an eye on your email for the next opportunity to join us. In the meantime, don't forget to schedule a time to talk to us. We look forward to hearing from you soon. Bye, everyone.